So yeah, I've been working in research my whole career, but moved to Chingford and Woodford Green 6 years ago, and the MP there is Ian Duncan-Smith, boo. And I decided it was a sort of moral obligation to start getting more actively involved in politics rather than being a sort of somebody that swore at the TV. I've got 20 slides to get through in 10 minutes, so I'm going to talk really fast. I'm going to talk about why Chingford and Woodford Green is interesting to a room of strategists, planners and marketeers, aside from the fact that it's home to David Beckham was born there, as was Johnny Ives. Two interesting facts about Chingford and Woodford Green. What did we see there in the last election, and what can we learn in the advertising industry? So we live in a time of cultural flux, we all know that, and a partly consequential hardening of public discourse. So people are being much more rude and aggressive to people, both in public life but also in social media forums. And nowhere is that playing out more clearly than in the current political landscape. Chingford and Woodford Green, does anyone live there? No. Brilliant. I do. So it's a totemic seat for the Conservative Party. So it's always been a true blue seat. Winston Churchill was followed by Norman Tebbit, White Van Man, and Ian Duncan-Smith has been the MP there for 27 years. And we were hoping at the last election that he'd be seen off into retirement, but sadly we just missed it. But it's also an area that symbolises the wide sweep of transformations and contradictions that I think Claire is going to come on to talk about in terms of what class means. And it's all compressed into one small area on the edges of East London, reaching out into Essex. It's almost a living laboratory of social and cultural flux. So you can't ask a researcher to do a presentation and not have a segmentation. So this is my qualitative segmentation, but actually I've seen the data and it very much bears up in this way. So you've got one group of people, skilled manual, self-employed, ex-East End, moved out from the 40s onwards to the suburbs. They benefited from the Right to Buy Act, Thatcherite policies. Then you've got people like me, liberal drift from Hackney from 2010 plus, pushed out because of house prices. Then you've got the growing private rental and social housing market, ethnically diverse and a lot of in-work poverty. And then you've also got actually a really rich category of people, which means that Chingford and Woodford Green actually has the biggest disparity in wealth of any London borough. And interestingly, it's also older than any London borough and also whiter. So it's a really interesting place to live and observe as a researcher. So, but this is what's interesting about Chingford Woodford Green. Actually, we completely bucked the trend, and we have bucked the trend right through since the 1997 election that Tony Blair rode to victory. So it was a very, very safe Tory seat until I moved there and joined the Labour Party. I joke, but actually that is right. So you can see in the 2015 election, it was still safe, true blue. And then 2017, we had a great local candidate called Bilal Mahmood. And then in 2019, we had the arrival of Faiza Shaheen, who I don't know if any of you have heard of her, but she's a really eloquent, outspoken, she does question time, news nights, she's got a big public profile. She also grew up in Chingford and Woodford Green, and that really helped, as you were saying earlier, having a local candidate. So it became close marginal, partly because Labour started acknowledging that it was changing, started investing more in campaigns, but also these shifting demographics that I talked about earlier in those typologies, giving rise to a cultural flux, different ways of seeing the world and viewing it, all perfectly encapsulated in the Conservative candidate, that is Ian Duncan-Smith, the MP, and the Labour candidate, Faiza Shaheen. So I did quite an interesting exercise here, the semiotics of IDS. So IDS actually really pairs with what you were saying about what working class people want and like, sums up in every fabric and fibre of his body traditional British notions of class, hierarchy and power. He's described affectionately as the quiet man. He represents class reverence, paternalism, monoculturalism, that what you were saying about looking back. He represents and exemplifies all of those things. He went to Sandhurst, he married into the aristocracy, he's decent, and I use that in inverted commas, let's not mention universal credit. Stability, strength, reliability. There is a comfort, a safety, a continuity, a line back to Little England, no change, as you said, royalty, army and patronage. So if I was to sum him up semiotically in one sentence, and I'm sure you can disagree with me, but I think he represents the expected natural order, as things should be. Queen and country, and actually this video surfaced at the beginning of this year where he talked about low value people and high value people, and that really feeds into this almost medieval notion of people's strata and how they're sort of fixed and fatalistic and you can't change them. And his election communications really played into that narrative. So this is a picture from the Daily Mail, and this quote, "Fear and loathing as the quiet man of politics faces down Corbyn's momentum mob." That's me. I'm not in momentum, no, but I do live in Chingford. So Dan Hodges visits the seat where hard left intimidation means Ian Duncan Smith needs police protection. Now, as somebody who's had the misfortune to attend lots of Labour meetings, never again, in the area, I can say that I wish they were that exciting, and they're very boring and full of retired middle-class people. But this idea that Labour is other, that it's counterculture, that it's chaos, really, this story comes up with every election, and I've now participated or volunteered in elections in Chingford, Woodford Green, in local elections, 3 national elections, the EU referendum, and in all of them, something like this will come out, that there's a mob, that they're against you, that they're not with you. So it's interesting, and it's a narrative that connects. So bringing me on to the semiotics of Faiza Shaheen, it's an interesting exercise doing semiotics on your friend. I thought a lot about this, and I think to sum it up in one slide, Faiza challenges, I don't know if anyone's familiar with her, but she challenges deeply held cultural codes around what power looks like. She's young, she's smiley, she's Asian, she's working class, she's a Londoner with a really Cockney accent, and people always complain about her accent when she goes on Question Time. She represents a challenge to traditional notions and constructs of power. In her class background, unapologetically working class, her gender, her race, her look, her writing and her delivery, she represents a definitive break from traditional expectations of what a leader looks like. And that's quite problematic for some people. So if I was to sum her up in one statement, I would say it's Britain as a modern, multicultural and tolerant society. That's what she stands for. And I think going back to, you know, that amazing moment of the 2012 Olympic opening ceremony, it was the sort of last gasp of liberal Britain in a way, because then we voted for Brexit and we've hardened and we've shifted to the right in terms of our outlook as a nation. So she represents cultural tension. She represents emergent power, to talk about how to think about the Raymond Williams way of thinking about cultural theory. She's a challenging orthodoxy and a lovely person. So so residual codes really are exemplified in IDS as a person. He's like a perfect caricature of as things were, completely tying into what your research found. As things were is how they should be. Brexit, resistant to change, that keep the status quo, concerns around immigration, family breakdown, and you don't need me to read the rest. And then you've got the emergent codes represented very satisfyingly in Faiza Shaheen around gender equality, globalisation, feminism, racial equality. In Chingford and Woodford Green, there's a real divide between, and you see it, I manage a local community forum on Facebook with 5,000 people. Great place to do digital ethnographic observation. And the thing that really divides is driving. Residuals love driving. They don't want to give up their cars. And emergent, let's build mini Holland. For any of you that live in Walthamstow, you'll know what that is. But that's about being pro-cycling, And so the two play out in really, and then another way of looking at it is, this is Kate and William, and this is Meghan and Harry. So you've got this clear way of dividing culture and dividing how people view the world. But the Conservative Party, whilst presenting established residual codes of hierarchy, class and tradition, as you've pointed out, was able to leverage social in a far more powerful, culturally resonant and coherent way. The language of Brexit culture, both visual and textual, was more readily incorporated into Conservative campaigning in a really powerful way. And these are the messages were played back verbatim to people like me on the doorstep, which it was really, really hard. I just want to get Brexit done was something that came out over and over again. And the Labour Party, HQ, didn't really have an answer for that, and that made it difficult. So Conservative narrative was simple and the codes were clear. It was abundantly clear to me, and if there are any researchers in the room, that they relied heavily and very effectively on primary research. It was clear they were doing research right the way through the campaign, polling and focus groups, as well as sort of adhering to marketing and cultural theory to achieve their aims. And I just don't think the Labour Party did that. In contrast, Labour HQ, I should say I don't speak for the Labour Party at all, these are my personal observations, it felt not clear or unified. It felt muddled and difficult to talk about on the doorstep, which I think hindered Pfizer, a brilliant candidate, rather than helped her. And I heard this so much. I love Pfizer, but a vote for Pfizer is a vote for Jeremy Corbyn, and I can't do that. So, what next for Labour? So, I think Chingford and Woodford Green will turn red in the next election, thanks to a brilliant local candidate who grew up in the area and these demographic shifts. But what does Labour need to do next? These are my thoughts. I think it needs to be far more attentive to the power of language and meaning in its communications. It seemed to reject both marketing and cultural theory, instead relying on ideological theory, which felt completely outdated and failed to connect with the electorate. Tapping into cultural codes, speaking the same language, was what the Labour national election campaign didn't effectively do at all. So, you know, planting 1 billion trees, it all felt meaningless and in the sky and didn't connect. So, understanding the changing nature of class and culture, and Claire, you're going to come on and talk about this, requires fresh thinking, not a reliance on old ideologies. It needs intensive and extensive research, a reappraisal of the British social landscape. And as John Harris said in The Guardian yesterday or the day before, Thatcherism was successfully responding to tectonic changes in the economy and society, while the left was stranded in a Fordist politics built around the factory and a monolithic working class identity that had long since faded. Now, that was talking about the 70s, but it's exactly the same now, and they have failed to move on. So, what can we learn from Chingford and Woodford Green? Research and good cultural analysis can distill ideas down to clarity in message and powerful address, and Pfizer did that to great effect, actually. It's not just about geography and getting out of London. I think it's quite lazy almost to say, you've got to get out of London, like you said. Actually, it's about your optics. It's about taking ethnographic observational approaches wherever you are, on the bus, where you live. Do that today. Pay attention to visual culture and everyday life signifiers of aspiration. But most importantly, and I think this is what I've learned from my brief foray into politics, feeling challenged by your views and perspectives is really healthy. It's really good to have people completely disagree with you, because it actually reminds you that you have a cultural lens in which you are making sense of the world and other people have other views. And as a good researcher, you've got to be able to acknowledge that at all times. So that's from the Daily Mash, the brilliant Daily Mash. Man who lives in a tiny village accuses Londoners of living in a bubble. So just because we're Londoners doesn't mean we're bad strategists or bad researchers. I've got a quote here from a music critic, Ian Penman. But it's a brilliant quote, and I found it the other day. Undesirable ideologies, the things that the left is always label badged against, are born and bred in daily language, in triviality, in those jokes that you shared with us, in casual acquaintances with culture. That's Ian Penman in 1980. Thank you.